What's up, guys? 0-1 yesterday as baseball continues to kill me. And then, of course, my strongest leans on those three college football games all were correct, and I didn't play them. Coastal Carolina, ridiculously easy win. The under in the later game, UNC in Minnesota, that hit. And the over in the Colorado game hit, which probably should have hit more easily than it did because Colorado threw that ridiculous interception in the end zone in, I think, the third quarter, maybe, that went off somebody on North Dakota State's leg or something like that. It might have been in the second quarter, actually. I can't even remember. It was a crazy interception. Dude was on the ground, the defender. I don't know who Sanders was throwing that to, and it bounces off his leg up into the air and gets picked. Crazy play. And then Colorado, I mean, they were getting a lot of the reffing calls down the stretch. Refs letting them do things, letting them commit false starts, letting them commit hits that probably should have been penalized. And then Deion Sanders, just with a 5-point lead, he can run the clock out essentially, or almost, and he's chucking the ball downfield, like trying to run up the score, basically. Maybe like he has money on the game or something on his own team. I don't know. I continue to really dislike this Colorado team. I don't think they're going to really be any good, but it's just, I don't know. It angers me. All right, Major League Baseball today. Let's try to get through this card here. There are two guys making their Major League debuts. I guess I'll mention that first with Cincinnati and Milwaukee. That's happening in the second game of a doubleheader because I think they're having to play a makeup game, which is probably the afternoon game because everything else is an evening game on Friday. The evening game, we don't even know who Milwaukee's starter is. I'm not going to be playing this game, but Rhett Lauder is pitching for Cincinnati, making his Major League debut. I think out of the two guys making their Major League debuts today, I think he is the better of the two. He's one of the higher touted prospects in Cincinnati's organization, although it seems like they think he's more of a back end of rotation type of guy, but he does throw hard. He only has a few pitches, it looks like, fastball, slider, and changeup, I think, with some decent movement on that slider, and he throws mid into the upper 90s on that fastball. So he does have some skill, but, and you know me, I like to play on, a lot of times I like to play on guys making their Major League debut if we know they have good stuff, because the opposing lineup is unfamiliar with them, hasn't seen them before, and has to adjust to them, so that pitcher can have an edge there. But I hesitate a little bit with Lauder, even though he may be good, but I look at his stats. He got moved up to AAA this year, and he wasn't there for that long, but just overall, his stats aren't that good. But in AAA, his ERA was like in the mid-4s, although I think he does have like a decent strikeout rate, decent strikeout walk rate, but ERA a bit too high for my liking. The whip slightly high there as well, in the one, somewhere in the high 1.2s, maybe 1.3. But not awful. Actually better than the other guy who's making his Major League debut, which is Samuel Aldigeri. Is that how you pronounce it? I should know because I'm Italian, and he's literally from Italy. I think it's Aldigeri, whatever, something like that. He is the Anaheim starter tonight against Seattle. Anaheim, by the way, I'm going to mention the teams that I think are in bad spots as well. Of course, Anaheim's returning home from a road trip, and they played yesterday in Detroit. But as I've mentioned, as they've been mentioning on Wager Talk quite a bit, these teams that return home from road trips, yeah, they're in bad spots, but it's actually a worse spot when they have a day off because it like kind of stops that momentum a little bit, and it like causes the team to get settled in at home a little bit more and get actually a little bit more distracted, although I still think it's a distracted spot either way. Anaheim went to Kansas City, Toronto, Detroit, and now they're returning home with no days off, and they only won 2 games in that entire road trip, including yesterday's against Detroit before they return home here, which that's the type of spot where I'm going to look to go against a team, even though they do have their guy making his Major League debut here. Aldigeri, he does have a deep arsenal. He's got 5 pitches, fastball, sinker, curve, slider, changeup, but it does look like his arsenal is pretty old school, man. He only throws in like the low 90s, and I guess his sinker is a pretty decent pitch, and he's got some like pretty slow speed, off speed stuff, like looking real old school there. I think that curveball is like in the high 70s, something like that. So I do kind of like arsenals like that. Like those can translate to Major League Baseball, but even though it is a new era where everybody's throwing hard and wrecking their arms and stuff. It's the Dusty Baker era of baseball, pretty much. The manager known for wrecking all of his pitchers' arms. But Aldigeri, they're bringing him up, I think, straight from Double-A. I don't even think he pitched in Triple-A, and his stats in the minors this year, they're not good. Like, in his stops in, A-ball and Double-A and whatever, he had ERAs between 4 and into the 6s, basically, and his walk rate was too high. His whip is way too high, approaching, I think, almost 1.5. It's just not something that I can really deal with. And in that game, Seattle is up from minus 165 to minus 184 as a road favorite because they have George Kirby pitching, and we know he is a very good pitcher. He has good numbers against Anaheim as well in a pretty decent sample size. They are familiar with him, but he holds them to a low 200s batting average. He's one of the better pitchers on Seattle. I think he's been struggling a little bit lately, but I think it's mostly been that one really bad outing that he had a few starts ago. Other than that, he's continued to be pretty good. So with one bad start, I don't know if there's that much you can take away from his bad recent performance because that one start is really skewing it. But Seattle has gone up to an even larger road favorite, 75% of the tickets on them, but 94% of the cash. So it looks like there is actual legit money coming in on the Seattle side. So, and why not? Because Anaheim's in a bad spot. And I guess these professional bettors are not sold on Aldigeri, and neither am I. So I'm staying away from that one as well. I believe he's a lefty as well, just to throw that out there. What else did I notice here on this card today? We do have a couple other teams returning home from road trips, and it's just it's something I don't love. Tampa Bay is returning home from a road trip. Bad spot for Tampa Bay in general. Returning from the West Coast, too, where they went to Oakland, played the Dodgers, and then Seattle. They're returning home, and they do have a day off, so kind of an exacerbated return home spot there, which is not good. But the starting pitching matchup I don't think is good, and San Diego is their opponent. San Diego played yesterday, and they're traveling in from St. Louis, so that's not the greatest travel spot either, although getting out of St. Louis after losing that last game to St. Louis could be maybe a little bit of a positive for them as far as refocusing. San Diego, I think they have the worst of the starting pitching matchup here, though, with Martin Perez. I just don't think he's a very good pitcher. 4.6 ERA, 1.51 whip. No thanks on that one. Even though he has had some better numbers recently, but his last couple of starts, he did not go deep into either of those starts at all against the Mets and Minnesota. Two good offenses, but still, that's it's not a good sign that he's not going deep into those starts. And Tampa Bay has a 345 batting average and 862 OPS off him in 58 at bats. So they've hit him well. So I don't think that Tampa Bay is actually fadeable in this spot because San Diego played yesterday and Tampa has the better starting pitcher in Taj Bradley pitching with 3.77 ERA, 1.16 whip. Good stats, although he's had a really rough month, but he faced Houston and the Dodgers for two of those four teams, but he also struggled pretty badly against the St. Louis team that isn't that great. And he put up an 8.14 ERA so far this month, which is obviously not good. And 16.8 strikeout walk ratio. So even though he's been good on the season and has strung together a few good months in a row, had a really good July, he really struggled in a couple of these starts this month and has been struggling recently. But he does have overall good stats, good stuff, and Seattle. I was just talking about Seattle. No, who are they facing? San Diego, the other West Coast team that starts with an S. San Diego, their hitters have never seen Taj Bradley before, so he could have a little bit of an edge there as well because they're unfamiliar with him. As I always say, the hitters have to adjust to that guy they're unfamiliar with. So I'm just going to throw that one out. And in that game, Tampa Bay is, they're down from minus 125 to minus 122, I think it was. Yeah. So the line has dropped on them a little bit, but San Diego is very public because Tampa Bay, we could see them start packing it in a little bit because they know their season is over, whereas San Diego is in the thick of it in the National League. So San Diego could be just in general the more motivated team. The line has moved against Tampa, but San Diego is very public, 96% of the tickets and only 93% of the cash. So the market, San Diego is so public and has a little bit less of the cash that I would not want to play in San Diego there for. That's a multitude of reasons there, because I think their starting pitcher is the worst pitcher and the market doesn't look good for it. So I'm not going to do that. And then let me see. There was one other team I think returning home for a road trip, which I believe is Texas. Yeah, they went to Cleveland, and then the White Sox swept the White Sox. But I mean, who doesn't at this point sweep an inept White Sox team who's like, I think they've won 4 of their last 30 games, and I think they've now set a record for the most losses before the end of August or something like that. Just, what can you even say about that? It's very unfortunate. But I can't go against Texas here because they are the superior team over Oakland. And John Gray is pitching for Texas against J.P. Sears for Oakland. I think John Gray is the better of those two pitchers. Both teams played yesterday, by the way, so the rest situation is a little bit of a wash, with Oakland coming in from Cincinnati, Texas coming in from Chicago. But Texas, like I said, returning home from a 2-series road trip, but with no days off and kind of a shorter road trip. It's not like the worst spot for Texas. And John Gray has good numbers against Oakland and is the better pitcher in general, although his whip is fairly high this year, 1.33 with a 4.32 ERA. So his stats aren't really that great this season, but his numbers against Oakland are pretty good. He holds them to below a 200 batting average, I think. And J.P. Sears on the other side, not excellent stats, 4.35 ERA, a little bit of a better whip with 1.22. But against Texas, I think his numbers aren't spectacular, though. They have a huge sample size against him, actually, and they're 275 batting average against him and 781 OPS. So Texas hits J.P. Sears decently, and they're very familiar with him. Again, not something that I want to do. I mean, just quickly, it looks like Chicago and Washington could be a decent pitching matchup between Shota Imanaga against Jake Irvin. I mean, they're both good pitchers, although Irvin, I think, has been struggling lately this season. Yeah, he's got a 5.46 ERA in the month of August, so he's starting to slide a little bit, but he has faced some pretty good offenses recently. Milwaukee, Baltimore, Philly, Atlanta. So he hasn't faced easy offenses there. So that potentially looks under-ish to me. That line is sitting at 8.5, juice to the under. It's a little bit more heavily juiced to the under now is where the line has moved. 80% of the tickets on the under, but 83% of cash on the under. And Imanaga, I think, has actually never been seen before by Washington. I think they still haven't faced him. And we know he's one of the better rookie pitchers here, putting up a great season, 3.08 ERA, 1.06 whip, and he continues to pitch pretty well. I mean, he's used to pitching professionally, so I don't think he's going to totally wear down as we get later into the season. He's continuing to pitch well. So that is that there. So, I mean, as far as the side, I think Imanaga does have a slight edge there, but Cubs are down from minus 160 to minus 153, laying quite a road price there. And some of it has to do with their offense starting to turn it on recently as well. 83% of the tickets on them and 94% of the cash on them. So they do have the cash discrepancy on them, even though it looks like the line has moved down on them a little bit. So I don't know about that. And then Kansas City and Houston, kind of interesting to me because Houston returned home yesterday and they still won in what was kind of a bad spot just because it was a return home spot. They won anyway. And now I do think they have an advantage in the starting pitching matchup today because Seth Lugo has really bad numbers against Houston, even though his stats this season are, of course, good. But in a 52 at-bat sample size, Houston has a 404 average against a 1,099 OPS. Crazy. Really, really bad stats for Lugo against Houston's offense. And Framber Valdez pitching for Houston also has been good this season, but he has way better numbers against the Royals in a 54 at-bat sample size. He's only allowed 9 hits to them, a 21-2 strikeout walk ratio, and has held them to a 167 average and 511 OPS. So decent sample sizes there. Valdez has the way better numbers against Kansas City than Lugo has against Houston. Houston is up from minus 148 to minus 158, but Houston has 66% of the tickets and 68% of the cash is over on the other side on Kansas City. So even though I think it is a big starting pitching mismatch in the specific matchup for Houston there, Houston has moved up in price, so it does look like some money or something has pushed Houston up, but the cash discrepancy looks in opposition to it. So I'm just staying away from it. And my one play is going to be on the Minnesota Twins. I think this is a good spot, man. I mean, Minnesota, they had yesterday off, so they're better rested. They're sitting at home and probably wanted to turn something around because they just got swept by the Braves. It would probably be better if they were getting out of there and not having to hear, what the press is saying about them right now, whatever. But having a day off, sitting at home already, I think is not the worst spot. But like I said, starting a road trip would actually be a better focus spot. But I still think they're going to want to bounce back after getting swept there at home. They're going to want to win a series here. They're still battling, man, for the playoffs, etc. So they are still fighting. They're going to still have to fight, and they know that they're facing a somewhat inferior Toronto team. And this Toronto team, by the way, played yesterday against my Red Sox. They wound up playing 5 games against the Red Sox. If you include that suspended makeup game on Monday, they played that plus the actual game on Monday that I unfortunately went to, and then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So they've played every day since Monday, including that doubleheader on Monday, all against a division rival in Fenway Park, concluding yesterday, although Toronto didn't use that many of their relievers, but Toronto's bullpen sucks, and because it was a 2-0 game with Bowden and Francis making another really good performance, as he's starting to pitch excellently, which is shocking to me, really, because I never thought he was that good. He threw a 1-hit, 7-inning shutout performance against the Red Sox last night, but then Toronto had to use Cabrera and Green, who is their closer, and they're really like kind of their only 2 good relievers. So Toronto's bullpen isn't in the best shape here, even though they only used 2 guys yesterday because the rest of their bullpen is pretty bad. And those 2 guys may be unavailable coming into today. So that doesn't look good for Toronto. Minnesota's bullpen will be more readily available, and they have the better bullpen. And they had yesterday off, whereas Toronto did not have yesterday off, and they're traveling from Boston to Minnesota. So all of that looks pretty bad to me. Toronto has Kevin Gausman pitching, and he's, a staple of their rotation, decent pitcher, 4.1 ERA, 1.22 whip, kind of what you expect from him. He was pitching more poorly earlier this season. He's been pitching better the last couple months. In August, 2.84 ERA, and has faced a couple of decent offenses and a couple of weak ones as well. But he only has a 24-10 strikeout walk ratio this month. So even though the ERA is good, that strikeout walk rate isn't very good. The strikeout rate isn't that high, and the walk rate is pretty bad. And that's including a 10-0 strikeout walk ratio and a 7-inning 2-hit performance against Anaheim in his last start, which was his best start of the month. I think. Well, both of his best starts were against Anaheim. His other one was a 7-inning shutout, but with fewer strikeouts. So if you take those Anaheim starts out, his numbers this month are not as good. Although he did pitch okay against Baltimore, but his strikeout walk rate certainly hasn't been that great this month. And then look at his stats against Minnesota, man. 111 at-bat sample size here. Minnesota has a 297 average off him, an 871 OPS. So he has not done well against Minnesota. And you might look and say, well, Gausman, look at his splits, man. He's way better on the road than at home this season. That's true. 2.47 ERA on the road, 5.49 at home. So he has been a lot worse at home. But his stats specifically at Target Field against Minnesota, I just told you his stats against Minnesota are not good. Looking at his stats, I pulled it up a little while ago. Even though his stats on the road are good, his stats at Minnesota in his career, let me bring this up here. I got to look at Yahoo to look at their entire career. At Target Field, let me see here. In 30 at-bats, I think he's made 6 starts there with only 1 win. He's allowed 36 hits, and he has a 5.7 ERA, 1.5 whip, and a 389 batting average against, even though he does have a 38.9 strikeout walk ratio there. His stats at Target Field in those 6 starts, it's a decent sample size to look at, not good. So he struggles against these Minnesota hitters. He struggles in this ballpark specifically. So I think that negates his road stats, I would say, because this specific park he does not do well in. And then on the other side, Pablo Lopez, I think, is the better of the 2 pitchers. 4.26 ERA, but a 1.14 whip indicates that I think his ERA should be, his whip should be, his ERA should be better than it is based on that whip. 161 to 33 strikeout walk ratio is quite good in 148 innings and only 136 hits allowed. That's a good strikeout walk ratio, man. And not that many hits allowed in 148 innings. High strikeout rate, and he's been turning it back on. His ERA was really bad a couple of months ago, and he has really turned that around. And I always said he was a good pitcher. If you look at all the rest of his stats, whip, strikeout rate, strikeout walk rate, all of that's good. So he was bound to turn it around, and he has been doing that with a 2.25 ERA in the month of August so far. And 19 to 5 strikeout walk ratio. Not bad. So he's in good form right now. Better than Gausman is, I would say. And then Lopez up against Toronto's hitters. He actually does have good stats against Toronto as well. In 34 at-bats, he's only allowed 4 hits to them, 8.3 strikeout walk ratio, 2 doubles, 3 triples. He's held them to a 118 batting average and 395 OPS. So he's held Toronto to a really weak offensive stats there. So that's good for Lopez. So I like Lopez in this one. And I think for all those reasons that I stated a little while ago, I think Minnesota's also in the better spot. And then look at Gausman. I didn't mention his overall season stats, but his overall season stats are okay with a 141 to 43 strikeout walk ratio isn't that bad, and 142 hits allowed, and 151 and a third innings pitched. So his strikeout rate isn't that high, but his stats overall are decent. But just Lopez's are a little bit better. Minnesota is up though. The market is indicating on Minnesota, and you have to lay a little bit of a price here, but I think they're the best play on the board today, up from minus 142 to minus 152. 81% of the tickets on them, so they are public because, of course, they do have the better record, but they have been struggling recently, so maybe they're not even public enough here with 94% of the cash. So it looks like they do have the cash coming in on them, and the market, the money line has moved in their direction as well. The best you can get right now is minus 150. I think if you want to just lay the money line with them, but at that price, I think splitting half on the run line and half on the money line makes more sense. And you could try to find the best run line and money line. You could also find the -1 run line at DraftKings and whatever. If you want to get a price that's probably close to like minus 110 or something, you could lay the -1 run line. But I like to split on the -1.5 run line, get plus money on that, and then lay the price on the money line and make it half and half of the bet on each, which is essentially like playing the -1 run line, but you get a little bit of a better price if you can shop around. You have different options. You can play each one at a different book. Minnesota, -1.5 run line at plus 145, I think is the best you can find there, and -150 on the run line. So splitting that bet half and half, that is what I like there. Minnesota Twins. And then we do have college football. Not as packed of a slate as yesterday's. 2 games here are just kind of uninteresting to me just because they have big spreads with Temple at Oklahoma. So we do have more FBS games today, but fewer FBS teams are playing. It's just more games between FBS teams. Whereas yesterday was a lot of FBS versus FCS. Oklahoma's a 42.5 point favorite, up from -39.5. 74% of tickets on them, 76% of the cash. I don't know what you can really take away from that. I don't want to get involved in this. They're just a huge favorite. And now we're in the Jackson Arnold era, as I think Dylan Gabriel is now gone from Oklahoma, and Arnold has been waiting in the wings, basically. So he's been on Oklahoma. He's been learning the system, basically. So he should know the system because he has been on the team practicing with them, and now it's his time, and he gets to face a pretty bad Temple team to start out his Oklahoma tenure. So we'll see about that, but at least he's familiar with their offense at the very least. So we'll see what happens there with Jackson Arnold. The other game that I'm not as interested in with a huge line is Wisconsin against Western Michigan. Wisconsin's up from -23 to -23.5 with juice. 74% of the tickets on Wisconsin, but only 67% of the cash. So unlike Oklahoma there, it looks like Wisconsin actually has less of the cash than the tickets on them. I probably wouldn't want to lay a big price with the Wisconsin team that is known for kind of playing like more defensive games and running the football a lot, even though that has changed a little bit in recent years with Wisconsin airing it out more. And that may continue to be the case because we know they now have Tyler Van Dyke. I almost said Trevor. Tyler Van Dyke, who I think came over from Miami. I'm pretty sure he's going to be Wisconsin's starter, but this is a new system for him. So even though he is an experienced college football quarterback from playing at Miami, he now has to jump into a new system and learn a new system. I don't think that's something you really do just right away and are off to the races, but he is facing a pretty inferior Western Michigan team here. So we'll see what happens there. But with Wisconsin, in their first couple of games, it's going to take some getting used to having this offense led by a new quarterback there. So we'll see what happens with that. TCU is at Stanford in the late game tonight. It's first on the board. It's first on the board out of the other two games. I don't know why, even though it is the late game. But the market looks like it's indicating against TCU, but I'm not sure I agree with that. TCU is down from minus 10.5 to -9 here. I wouldn't want to take Stanford at the worst price when you could have gotten a plus 10.5. I don't know. And now it's down to 9. You probably can't find the 10 anymore there. If you could get the 10, maybe. But the market is indicating there with the line dropping on TCU. 64% of the tickets are on TCU, but 52% of the cash over on the other side on Stanford. Of course, the recreational bettors they just know TCU is kind of the better program in recent years in general. They saw them, make the championship game 2 years ago, although I think they were playing way above their pay grade that year. They should not have gone as far as they did that year. They overperformed, but then last year I think they actually underperformed, and they were probably in kind of a hangover season coming off that ridiculous season the year before that where they overperformed and then had a bad season last year going below 500, which is not really something you usually see out of TCU. So I think the reality lies somewhere in the middle. They are returning. I think their quarterback is returning, and I think their best wide receiver is returning. So they are returning some of their key components, but I think they are kind of middle of the road as far as returning production is concerned. I'm not really sure about that, but they are certainly the better team as they're laying points on the road. Stanford actually has some of the highest returning production in college football, but is that even a good thing when they only won 3 games or whatever last year? I don't know. Stanford, not a whole lot of talent on this team, but they are returning a lot of their guys, so they do have experience playing with each other, so that could be a little bit of an advantage Stanford has early on with guys that have that chemistry already built in. But like I said, when it's a bad team like Stanford, I'm not sure that that's really that great, but the market is indicating pretty strongly on Stanford, stronger on Stanford than it is on any of the other teams tonight as far as the side. So that does look like it may be a play there. And the under also has a lot of cash on it. So it seems like the betting market is kind of signaling on this being a bit of a lower scoring game too, although the total is sitting at 60, the highest total on the board out of these 4 games. But market has 60% of the cash on the over, but 83% of the cash on the under. So the biggest ticket cash discrepancies are on this game, I think, on both the total and the side, basically. Interesting. Although on the total, it looks like there was a big cash discrepancy on the over in the Western Michigan-Wisconsin game too, which I'm not sure I totally agree with that one, but maybe because Wisconsin's perceived as more of an under team and they're kind of shifting to that being less the case with these quarterbacks that they're bringing in and whatever, and different style of offense. So we'll see about that. But this TCU-Stanford game, pretty big, cash discrepancy on the under here, and with the total kind of just dropping a little bit from 61 to 60, and of course on Stanford, dropping the line down to -9 on TCU. But Stanford certainly has the less talent, the lesser talented team out of the two. And TCU, they could have reason to be focused in this first game because remember what happened last year. They were coming off that championship loss and in that bad hangover spot, which kind of lasted the entire season. But a lot of times that losing championship team, especially if they were playing well above their actual talent level like TCU was that year, they shouldn't have made it as far as they did. They were really ripe for a bad game in that first game of the season, and they got picked off at home as a 20-something point favorite against Colorado. But then, of course, we saw TCU wasn't as good as we thought they were. But because that happened at TCU last year, and they got picked off at home as a favorite in this week 1 game, that might actually have them focused with some of these guys returning from that game. They remember that, man. And that was a former Pac-12 team in Colorado, and they're facing a former Pac-12 team here as well in Stanford. So TCU may have reason to be focused because of that, because they don't want that to happen again. They remember what happened in week 1 last year, embarrassing upset loss against Colorado. So they could be focused for that reason with some of these guys returning. And then we have FAU at Michigan State is the last game on the board, even though it is one of the earlier games at 7 p.m. Low total in this one, down from 48 to 45. I mean, this is a Michigan State offense that might struggle. And because this total is so low, that means that there's more value in potentially taking points here with a double-digit spread. Michigan State up from -11 to -13 with juice, but that total going down. So a 13-point spread with that low of a total, man, I mean, those points could have some value there if you want to take Florida Atlantic, which I do lean to that side a little bit. 53% of the tickets are on Michigan State, only 51% of the cash. The public kind of off of Michigan State because they've been unimpressive recently. The glory days are kind of over in recent years for Michigan State, and they have not been a good scoring offense. Hence why this total is so low as well. But that's also why the public isn't really heavily on them. But with a total this low, a game expected to be very low scoring, those points are worth more, man. So it could be value in grabbing Florida Atlantic here. And Michigan State, I think there are going to be some growing pains here, man, as they have a new coach coming in, Smith, I think, coming over from Oregon State. So he's going to have to implement a new system, and his recruits, his guys won't be there yet. So he's still dealing with, of course, he has to deal with guys who are already on the Michigan State team who aren't his recruits. So a lot of times when that's the case and that new coach is coming in and trying to shift over to his regime, and he's got the old players there from the previous regime, there are growing pains there. So that could be the case. Michigan State, I believe, also has a new quarterback coming in here as well. I don't even know who their quarterback is going to be. I think they actually have 2 transfers coming in, and they actually don't even know which guy is actually going to be the guy, if I remember correctly. They have Aiden Chiles, like Chile, the South American country. He's coming in from the through the transfer portal from I don't even know where he's coming from. Tommy Schuster, I guess, is also coming in from North Dakota. So they're bringing in 2 transfers, and I don't know which one of these guys is going to be the starter. Probably Chiles, because he was actually at Oregon State, I think. So I think was Smith actually at Oregon State? I don't even know. Jonathan Smith is the coach. I think he is. So he's bringing his quarterback over. So I expect him to start. So that is something there. So Michigan State's quarterback, Chiles, might actually be one of Jonathan Smith's guys. So maybe that kind of mitigates that a little bit. So he probably will be the starter, but still, it's going to be a new offense. So they're going to have to get used to playing with the other guys that they have on this team and whatever. And I think they did bring over his center as well from Oregon State. So and his tight end, I think. So they have brought over some Oregon State players from Smith's regime over in Oregon State. So a few of the guys on the offense. So a little bit more familiarity there. So these guys do have a little bit of chemistry for that reason. So this isn't like something where I think it's a very strong play on Florida Atlantic necessarily. Florida Atlantic's they're trying to transition to this new regime. They have a guy coming in who I don't know how many years he's been there. Tom, I forget what the guy's name is over at Florida Atlantic here. Let me see. Tom Herman. Yeah, that's his name. I think he's been there for a couple of years now, so they should be kind of getting into his system. I could be wrong about that, but they have a new quarterback as well who does have some experience, but he's coming over from Marshall. I forget the guy's name, but some new faces in a lot of cases in this game here, but we'll see what happens here. But that's going to do it for me, man. My only play is that split play on the Minnesota Twins, half on the run line, -1.5, +145, and the other half on the money line, -150. Come on, man. Let's go Twins. Let's get me a win. Football season is starting, and we got to start flipping this around, man. I know I have not put out my college football week 1 video yet, which is getting late, but obviously I'll talk about the Saturday slate. Hopefully tonight I'll just get that done because I don't think I'm really doing anything tonight, even though it is a Friday night. But I got to still dive into that card further. And I know we're going to have some lesser value on some of these lines here that have been out for so long. But I think we should be able to find some spots there. So let's get it done. Peace.